we're creating about as many jobs as those other metros combined.
So Bend hates to be compared to Boulder.
We could have a whole hour conversation about this. I think it sets us up another kind of foundation.
Participating. I think that's the difference between being a citizen or sitting on the sidelines.
These conversations are brought to you by the Ladd Group, Bend's leading real estate team. Help continue this Bend Beat conversation by subscribing, sharing, and leaving us a review. We're joined here today by Phil Chang, who is, you've been serving as a Deschutes County Commissioner since what, 21?
Yep, January 2021. So I'm just entering my 4th year now.
Wonderful. Well, you and I just got to know each other more recently, and we've had some really interesting discussions. I thought it would be informative. So often we're talking about what happens just here in Bend, but we've got to, I have to remind myself that we're in Deschutes County, and that what happens in Deschutes County, affects what happens here, and vice versa. And you've been a very public figure in the last couple of years, and I think that we could have some really interesting discussions today.
Yeah, no, Bend is the largest city in Deschutes County, but it is not all of Deschutes County, and the relationship between Bend and the rest of the county is, it is one of the driving forces in the region.
Wonderful. Well, before we get too into wonky policy, things like that, let's talk about your origin story here in Central Oregon. You've been here since what, 2004?
2004.
Yeah. So what brought you to Central Oregon, and tell us a little bit about why you're here.
Yeah. Well, I originally came here looking for a place to raise a family, and to have access to the outdoors. And I worked for many, many years in natural resources management. So this was a place where there was really interesting things happening in terms of restoring the river and protecting the watershed, and managing forests, trying to make our dry forest ecosystem here more healthy and more resilient, and to protect our community from wildfire. So those were some of the things that drew me here.
Yeah. What was the role you were working for? What, the Central Oregon Intergovernmental Council? Was that your role in working in the environment?
I worked for CYC as their natural resources program administrator for about 9 years.
Okay.
Did a couple of other things right at the beginning of when I moved here. I came here without a job.
Yep.
Instructed geography at COCC, worked for the city of Bend doing I was their water cop for a little while.
Okay. Water cop for domestic water use.
Yeah, basically cruising around neighborhoods and checking to see who had, broken sprinklers and stuff like that.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, I spent most of that time, my first decade here, I spent most of it working for CYC.
Okay.
And again, working on forest restoration, trying to bring all these stakeholders together.
Yeah.
To see what they could agree on, timber industry, environmentalists, firefighters, and also spent a lot of time advising our cities and counties on water resource regulatory issues.
Okay. So wow. So you have a deep background in environmental policy. I look here and I'm a little intimidated. Your academic credentials include a BA from Columbia University and a master's from UC Berkeley. And what did you study there?
So at Berkeley, I was a natural resource policy and management.
Okay.
So I technically got an MS, Master's in Science, but I spent most of my time, studying social sciences and policy stuff.
Okay, so you've obviously got a deep background in all of this. What has attracted you to apply that in a public service role instead of a position in private industry? What brought you to public service to work on the issues that you're working as a county commissioner?
Yeah. Well, I like you and like so many of us, I came to this community and I put down roots, and I feel really passionate about where I live, and keeping it a great place to live for all the people who want to come here and all the people who continue to be here. if you care about this region, the one of the top things on your brain is growth.
Yes.
At growth management, and working in natural resources, I could really help with management of the Deschutes National Forest, the federal lands, or I could really help with specific improvements in the irrigation water system, for agricultural irrigation water system for the region. But so much of what we need to think about in terms of growth management is land use.
Yeah.
And when you get to questions of land use, we have a state land use planning system, but then it really is up to local governments, cities and counties, to implement our land use planning system and to kind of decide what kind of growth we're going to have.
Yeah.
Whether we're going to have a whole lot of large lot rural residential development, whether we're going to have multifamily housing in the cities, and everything in between, is in part determined by the way that we govern land use in the region. So that was one of the things that was really attractive to me about being a county commissioner, was getting to be right in the middle of those land use, some of those land use decisions. And in a lot of ways, you get a lot more leverage and you have a lot more influence on land use at the county level than at the city level. The cities, they have urban growth boundaries. They're required to, grow at certain densities, and in general, our urban growth boundaries encourage, transportation smart, really efficient use of land, the land that we have available, infrastructure smart ways of growth. But at the county level, it's more like a blank slate.
So there's a lot of room for interpretation, and there's a lot of room for political strife when it comes to those decisions as well, right? And I've noticed that there's a lot of politicalization or polarization of on the county commissioner level, and a lot of the opinions that people have about that role. I guess, how has your experience been with that? And is that strife based on bigger macro trends of where we are as a nation, or is it boiled down to how that particular land fits within the bigger plan of Oregon state land use laws?
I would say both.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely the debates are couched in the state land use planning system, but the tone, the lack of civility, I think that a lot of that really trickles down from the national level. So, the major, ideological battle we fight, almost every week on the Board of Commissioners for Deschutes County is about our rural lands, our exclusive farm use zone lands, and our forest zone lands. So these are lands that were set, reserved essentially by our state land use planning system, and given really preferential tax status if they're put in agricultural or forest production. So the state very intentionally, with land use restrictions and with tax policy, said we want agricultural lands and forest lands to stay working lands. And in Deschutes County, there are many people, including a couple of my fellow commissioners, who really believe that a lot of our rural lands should be available for residential development, and that exclusive farm use or forest zoning doesn't make sense. So we grapple about that, and over here on the east side of the Cascades, plants grow slower. It's drier. It's higher. It's colder. So it is not as productive forest land or farmland as it is over on the west side of the mountains in many ways. And so people who are don't support conservation of that land as exclusive farm use or forest zone, they say, well, yeah, it's this is marginal marginal farmland. You can't really do anything with this. The best use of it would be to put houses on it, and then, but. And I, on some level, I don't disagree. When you look around the edges of the city of Bend, the edges of the city of Sisters, we can offer up some of that land for growth and development.
Yeah.
It's when people start talking about, well, we should just take all this exclusive farm use zone land and turn it into rural residential 10.
Which is one per house per 10 acres.
One house per 10 acres.
Anywhere in the county.
Anywhere in the county.
Yeah.
And I just think that that's wasteful.
Yeah.
It's an inefficient use of land, because that land, besides whatever farm or forest value it has, it's also providing habitat and open space.
Yeah.
Habitat connectivity. It is that land has carbon storage. It has incredible value as working landscape or wildlands, as well as whatever farm or timber value that it has. That's where it really comes to a head is around rezoning these lands to rural residential 10 or a multiple use agriculture 10.
Yeah.
And not only is it, in my opinion, wasteful to use land that way, it also it's often pitched as, this is how we address our housing shortages.
Yeah, because I was about to go to that. A lot of people are going to say, hey, we have to make some compromises, and if it's marginal, use or agriculture land, it's the perfect place to put more residential housing.
Right.
Yeah, so I guess continue that thought, like would upzoning all that land from exclusive farm use to residential 10 across the county solve our housing issue?
Yeah. I believe that we could add hundreds of acres of rural residential 10, and you're not going to get housing that is attainable to our local workforce. People who are making
10-acre lots, yeah.
Yeah, a 10-acre lot. I mean, the land cost alone of
Yeah.
a 10-acre lot, before you start building what's typically a pretty big house on the 10-acre lot, this is not housing that is attainable to
Workforce
someone
housing.
who's making local salaries and wages. Yeah, it's not workforce housing. So, if our analysis of our housing stock shows us that what we need the most is workforce housing, the missing middle housing and the attainable, affordable housing, building a bunch of 10-acre ranchettes is not going to get us there. I also think that one of the other pieces at play here is destination resorts, and I would make a similar argument. Destination resorts, they're pretty land intensive, and
just to interrupt, for our listeners that aren't familiar with this is a higher density development within the county that's outside of city, and it was originally designated by the state to bring economic stimulus to rural areas that had a failing economy, right?
Yeah.
And this was to put the picture in people's mind. This is Sun River. This is
Eagle Crest,
et cetera.
Pronghorn.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would make the same argument about destination resorts. It is a more land intensive use. It's not as dense as urban development, and oftentimes they put them in the middle of nowhere. Right.
Yeah.
So you're creating this whole new residential center, but people need to drive from the destination resort to town to get groceries, to go to their job, to go to their medical appointments. So in terms of traffic congestion, putting a lot more people out in the rural county, has significant impacts in terms of traffic congestion. And if you want to follow that to climate change and concerns about climate change, it has a lot of impacts on greenhouse gas emissions.
Brian Ladd here. I hope you're enjoying the conversation and find this dialogue relevant to really what it means to live and work and play in this amazing community. As Ben's leading real estate team, we take our role seriously in representing both buyers and sellers at the absolute highest standards of our industry. For more information on how we can help, feel free to visit our website at benpropertysource.com or text LADD1, LADD1 to 88,000.
Okay, so a naysayer saying, okay, if you're not open to upzoning exclusive farm use land and you're not in favor of a lot of new destination resorts around the state, how do we provide housing?
Right.
And I guess this might relate to a conversation that we had about the land that's close into the urban growth boundary of the city.
Right.
You're not, from our discussions that we've had previously, you're not pro or anti-housing in any way, shape, or form. It's in a bigger, you want to place housing in a bigger picture of the Oregon land use laws of dense urban centers and low density rural land elsewhere, right?
Right.
So let's talk about the land that's closer to the urban growth boundaries.
Absolutely.
And how you see that and how you see your role in rezoning and how that ties in with the larger plans of the cities.
Yeah. Thank you for that question. So the perfect spot to discuss this is right on the eastern boundary of the city of Bend. You go out Highway, you go out Highway 20, you reach the edge of the city, and to the north and the south of you, there have been a number of comprehensive plan amendment and rezone applications for EFU zoned lands out there, and I have supported. I basically supported all of the rezone applications in that area, and 60 acres here, 92 acres here, 40 acres there. It adds up. So out there we have seen 59 acres here. We've seen probably around close to 300 acres of rezone applications just in the 3 years that I've been on the Board of Commissioners.
Yep.
And those 300 acres, 300 acres. That is, once we rezone it, then it makes it much easier for the city to bring that land into the urban growth boundary when the next time they're ready to do that. And when the city of Bend is going to do its next urban growth boundary expansion, that's very mysterious to me. But the argument that a number of these landowners made was, well, if we continue to be exclusive farm use zoned, the city will be discouraged heavily from bringing these lands into the city, and these are right on the edge of the eastern edge of the city. These are in my mind very appropriate lands for accommodating our future growth, and I want to see them developed at urban densities. So, one of these parcels was 59 acres. So if we rezone that land from EFU to rural residential 10 at 59 acre property, they are allowed to have only 5 homes. If you develop that 59 acres at urban density, you could conceivably get 500 homes into that land, and that is when I talk about using land efficiently. That's really what I want to emphasize is that there's a lot of people who want to come here. Land is really precious and has value in our community, so we should be using it as efficiently as possible.
So that's interesting. So if we're on the eastern boundary of Bend and someone comes in and said, hey, I want to break it into, change mine to rural residential 10, which gives them 5 houses. Do you have any sort of compliance or agreement that will ensure that it actually turns into high density once rolled into the city? Because what I would be fearful is if you say, okay, let's get that rezoned to 5, but the urban growth boundary takes 10 or 15 or 20 years to get there, all of a sudden we've given 5 acres that could be 5 per acre, and it turns into 1 per 10 acre, and they don't wait, and they break it into 10 acre pieces with spread infrastructure of low density, and all of a sudden then when the urban growth boundary goes to expand, it's no longer applicable land. Like, how do you ensure that rezone isn't wasted?
That is what's been eating at me. It's been really bugging me for the last couple of years. And so I've asked county staff and I've asked the city, how do we ensure that this two-step process is completed, right?
Yeah.
Rezoning is one step, and then how do we make sure that the land takes that second step and gets brought into the urban growth boundary before it's developed? Because, you build 5 really high-end, ranchettes out there, and then when the city is ready to come through there, it's going to be a nightmare trying to build around it.
Yeah.
And they're not going to want to, what you've lived in your $2 million home on 10 acres for 6 or 7 years. You're not going to want to tear that down and let them build density. The city, has to wring its hand. They're dealing with all kinds of regulatory complexity. So they can't. They shrug their hands and they say their shoulders and they say, we can't tell you exactly when we're going to do an urban growth boundary expansion. So no assurances there. The county, one of the ideas that we've come up with is that the county could do some kind of an overlay right in the vicinity, the near vicinity of our incorporated cities.
Yep.
They can do an overlay that says, all right, you currently at RR10, you have the right to 5 units. Mm-hmm. If you want to build those 5 units right away, we will require you to cluster them in a portion of your 59 acres, and then the rest will still be available for urbanization later on.
Yeah.
And the density, the cluster of 5, that'll probably be closer to urban densities than one house per 10 acres.
Okay, so you're gonna are you making progress with that? Do you see hope in creating that overlay?
I know that county staff is doing the analysis now.
Okay.
What the code language would need to look like and what creation of that overlay would look like. I am not sure when it comes to the Board of Commissioners, I'm not sure if we have the votes to approve that or not.
It seems like a missing, or it's a gray area, and I assume this gray area handoff between counties and cities is occurring statewide?
It's different in other areas.
How so?
In a lot of other parts of the state, there is a lot of fighting between cities and counties about urban growth boundary expansions. There's a lot of counties that oppose, or actively meddle in urban growth boundary expansions.
Okay. So they don't mind rural residential 10 if that hems in the city.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I don't totally understand why that is.
Okay.
But what the power dynamics are between those cities and counties. But it happens in other places, in the Willamette Valley and other places. Here, the county has historically, it's supported urban, whatever the cities want to do on urban growth boundary expansions, the county follows their lead.
Okay.
We have significant internal drama at the county board of commissioners about the stuff that's farther out.
Okay. The rezones that are further away from urban growth boundaries.
Yeah, but it is true. I mean, one of my fellow commissioners, when we talk about that 59-acre rezone, he says, our job is just to evaluate whether that is highly productive farmland or not, and complete the rezone. And if they want to develop at RR10 densities, then they have every right to. And I would say yes, they have the right to, but is it the best thing for our community?
For the long term, community, and ultimately probably for the highest return on value for that landowner as well. But
yes,
it's forcing it to become a more nuanced, complex decision and development than simply putting a stamp on a piece of paper and saying rezoned.
Yeah.
So why fight that fight? What keeps you going with that much political strife and lack of clarity on how you work, the counties work with the cities, et cetera? What keeps you motivated to keep pushing through complex issues as opposed to just taking the easy way out?
It's what's at stake. I mean, if if we only get those five homes on those 59 acres, that is not attainable housing for our local workforce.
Yeah.
And if we're using land that inefficiently, and we're chopping up the landscape with 10-acre ranchettes and destination resorts, the impacts to habitat are huge. Our local wildlife populations, they are, some of them are at a real tipping point.
Yeah, some of the mule deer and whatnot are really plummeting, right?
Yeah, the mule deer population has dropped by 50% in like a decade in our region.
Yeah,
So we're seeing the potential collapse of some of our most important wildlife populations. So habitats, housing attainability, affordability. I believe that we should be trying to get people close enough and in good enough access to work and school and shopping and their medical appointments that they could choose sometimes to walk or bike, or at least that they don't have to drive for 10 miles and snarl up the edges of our city with really, really awful rush hour traffic. So there's transportation reasons for this, and I think that what we're talking about out there on the east side of the city is we're talking about high desert, and I believe that the high desert has intrinsic value in and of itself. I mean, there is a lot of it out there, but we have gobbled up a lot of it with the growth of the city and the development of rural residential properties. Something that's really important to mention is that Deschutes counties, we're just over 200,000 people.
Yeah.
And we have, outside of incorporated cities, we already have 34,000 housing units.
Okay.
So it's
So you're not against rural lifestyle?
No. I mean, those 34,000 housing units, I am glad they're there. Some significant portions of those were developed as part of destination resorts in the era when we really needed destination resorts to bring people here, expose them to this wonderful place, to drive investment and drive tourism. As we know, most of the folks who decide to come here to live, came here first as tourists. So those destination resorts, for example, were extremely important for the kind of trajectory and economic diversification of our community. I just think that with 34,000 housing units outside of incorporated cities, we don't need to build thousands more 10-acre rural residences.
Yeah, so it's interesting because I think one could have an emotional response of saying, well, hey, I don't want to ride an electric scooter and live in a city. That's not my vision. I want to live rural. But what's interesting is that if you allow your thoughts to become more nuanced, by not allowing lower density, urban density to spread throughout the county, what you're actually doing is protecting land at land values that actually support that rural lifestyle, farm use, that lifestyle that people don't want to lose.
Absolutely, yeah, and
because there's a big delta between land that's applicable for 10-acre development versus exclusive farm use, which exclusive farm use can have a farm, can have a house, whatnot. So it's keeping rural and urban.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously this is a loaded conversation that can bring in a lot of different emotions and political views about property rights, whatnot.
Yeah.
But I think that we're very fortunate to have someone of your background and expertise in land use and natural resources, fighting the good fight. And obviously, it's not an easy one. We've got a lot of different opinions, but I think those who aren't familiar with what happens at the county needs to be, I hope that they're appreciative that you're bringing this angle. Whether they completely agree with your opinions or not, I think it's really important to be bringing a more nuanced, longer term perspective rather than rubber stamping rezones throughout the county. I think we're very fortunate to have you in that role. And so what's next for you? You've been doing this a while.
Been doing this a while.
You're gonna keep going?
Well, I did just throw my hat in the ring to run for re-election.
Okay, and is that part of this November ballot as well, or?
May.
May.
So
Okay.
Yeah. So County Commissioner seat number 2 will be contested first in May.
Okay.
And if any of the candidates clear 50%, get 50% of the vote plus one or more, then they're done, and they just wait till they do whatever they were doing before until January of 2025 when they're sworn in.
Okay.
So
well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
This is. I think you're doing probably what's a little bit of a thankless job that has a big effect on the future growth and what Central Oregon is going to look like for decades to come.
Thank you. Yeah, I do feel like I'm framing the issues in a different way for people and putting out an alternative vision to what people are used to in many cases, but and that can earn me a lot of flack, but there's also a lot of people in the community who are noticing and appreciate it, and that that's why I'm here. I want to represent the hopes and concerns of the people of Deschutes County, and I feel when I hear from people, when I get positive feedback from people, I feel like I'm doing my job.
Yeah, and while each one of our lives are a little bit different, we're all here for very similar reasons. We have a shared set of cultural values, and conversations like this are making me more excited, or gives me reassurance that there's hope. And it's from houselessness to housing affordability to the environment, there's a lot to be concerned about, and I appreciate you, one, sharing your time, but more importantly, fighting the daily fight when a lot of us in private industry are sitting on the outside of this work.
Well, I appreciate that, but I also I want to thank you for the insights you provide to me about the realities of we were just having a conversation before about what makes it so hard to build condominiums, build and sell condominiums here. And that is incredibly valuable for me in whatever kind of policy making role I play, so that if I have certain goals of making housing attainable, but preserving our rural environment, I know better how to navigate and set policy to accomplish those goals, but also to make it possible, to make it as easy as possible for folks who are involved in producing that growth that we want to do so. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Yeah, when I first arrived in this community, I was imbued with the belief that we do things differently here, and that it's all through collaboration and discourse. And so let's keep fighting that fight.
That is sometimes they call it the radical center, right? So I'm very happy to try to fight for the radical center, and I appreciate that you just basically said the same thing.